Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Uplift TV, where we share the stories, strategies, and inspiration to help you unscript yourself and create a life that you really love. My name's Hayden. I'm the host of this show. I am an uplifter and leadership coach, so I work with solopreneurs and small business owners who want to unscript themselves to create more time, energy, and freedom in their lives and in their businesses. Historically, with this show, I've been doing a lot of solo presenting, sharing, teaching, talking about topics that matter and talking about topics that I find make a big difference for the clients that I work with. But one of the things that I'm looking at more broadly is incorporating other people and really highlighting entrepreneurs who are living in an unscripted way. They're breaking the mold. They're doing things differently. And so what I want to start to do is bring those solopreneurs, those entrepreneurs onto this show, interview them, learn a little bit more about what they're up to, their story, so that you all can benefit. Because I think that one of the things around breaking up with the script and doing things differently is it's a lot easier to do when you have an example or when you see other people who are in a similar boat as you doing something really cool. I know that's definitely been the case for me. And so I'm really excited to do the first of these unscripted spotlights with my recent acquaintance and new friend, Kris Hughes. Kris, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks. Great to have you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
100%. And so it's so funny. I ran a podcast last year, and one of the ways that I always started the podcast was reading people's bios, which is fine. But I also think it's so much better actually hearing from and learning from directly the person, what you do and what you're up to. So I'd actually love to have you kick us off in telling us a little bit about who you are, how you serve people, and what you're up to.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, my name is Kris Hughes. I'm the founder of Zanate Ventures. It's Zanate. It's a Spanish word for grackle. People ask me that all the time. So if y'all have seen like the blackbirds, like the grackles, kind of identify with that. They're ever present here in Central Texas. So I'm in Austin. So Zanate Ventures, we're a ghostwriting and content strategy consulting company. So I work with solopreneurs and small business owners all over the country and about to be all over the world, actually, with a couple new clients. On really helping them establish awareness through social media. I do some blogging, ghostwriting as well. So I kind of do that in the background. And just helping them build more awareness and drive organic leads through, building out that content presence. I work in a variety of ways. Some like a coaching capacity, some where it's more collaborative, where I'm working with a business owner and we're kind of working on a roadmap together and both creating content and developing voice. And sometimes they just want to turn it over and want me to do it, kind of done for you. They don't have time or they just don't want to handle it. And they turn it over to me and let me run with it and build it.
Nice. That's awesome. I think that's so important, especially I think where we're headed in terms of online communities, digital communities, and how people connect with each other. Actually getting a sense for, and I know that this is true for me, the last couple of times that I've invested or bought something, what's been really important to me is getting to know, like, and trust the people that I buy from. And so I think that's so important what you're doing and supporting people in, like, hey, how do I tell the story of who I am as an individual? How do I get myself out there? How do I create more visibility for my business and how I work with people?
Yeah, for sure. And, I think of it as, I call it the TVD Matrix, which is trust, value, and demands, and ultimately those are like the three big pillars for everybody to work off of in terms of, like, if you've never created content before, that's where it should start. And that should be really the backbone of what you write and, what you create or the video that you produce, whatever it may be. Because ultimately, people just want to know, why should they trust you? What about your background, about your history makes you trustworthy? What about your personality makes you trustworthy? Value-wise, what do you bring to the table? What's that unique offering that you provide, and how you can help people figure out theirs and think about what their unique value is that they want to present to the community. And then demand, obviously, is like separation from competition. What do I do differently, or what do you do differently from somebody that's doing the same thing? There's a lot of ghostwriters and a lot of LinkedIn strategists out there. There's a sea of them. I know how I present my separation point, but I think that's important for people to think about as they're crafting that story and how they present themselves to the world.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, thanks for sharing that. One of the places I wanted to start was looking at your story as an entrepreneur. Because one of the things that I've discovered for myself is that it never looks the way that you think that it's going to. And to expect any different is a recipe for a lot of anxiety and self-doubt. So, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about what your entrepreneurial story or journey has been.
Yeah, for sure. So I've kind of moved from starting stuff for myself to working in the corporate world to being back working for myself again. So it's been like a long kind of winding road. I started out as a sports writer in around 2010 and built out my own sports blogs. I self-taught WordPress. Was writing on like college football and college basketball. Really didn't know what I was doing at first. I was just kind of like fed up with my day job, and I taught myself that stuff and did well enough at it that I was able to sell those blogs to another network and worked for them for a couple of years and had the day job while I was doing that at the same time. And by 2014, by the time that rolled around, I had my first full-time opportunity in the digital publishing world with a big digital publisher based here in Austin. Worked for them for 4 years. They were acquired. I was laid off. Worked in the SaaS content marketing world for about 18 months and was like, I'm tired of this. Like, this is just not, I don't want to work under fluorescent lights and open floor plans anymore.
Not for you. Yeah.
3 bosses, I'm just, it was not had enough. At that point, I just turned 40 before that too, not too long before that. And it was just kind of a lot of things coming together, me realizing I needed to take control over my own destiny, and probably not the brightest decision to start a business right before COVID, not knowing that COVID was coming. So I really kind of kicked things off last February, had a couple of contracts to help see me through like the first 7-8 months of COVID. And then, really dug into LinkedIn and creating there about last July. And built my ghostwriting business and got my clients from that work.
Nice, that's awesome. And I think it's important too to highlight or just reiterate the kind of back and forth between corporate and entrepreneurship, because I know, one of the things that I've definitely struggled with, and that I know a lot of other people struggle with too, is this idea of like, once you jump into entrepreneurship, that's the thing, and you got to do everything that you can, right, to make that happen. And going back to corporate or getting a job is, not doing it right, or you failed, or what have you. And so I'd be curious to hear from you, like, when did you decide that it was the right time to make those jumps, or what was going through your brain in terms of deciding like, hey, now's the right time to shift gears and do something different?
Yeah, for sure. I think, the first one was, it just kind of evolved into more of a corporate type role, basically, where I was working with a startup and was helping them build that. I came in as an employee 6 with this company and saw it through to where we had like 30 employees. So I was in pretty early on. So I wasn't corporate in the traditional sense of like working in a large corporation. It was more so like kind of growing and going through the growing pains and, all the struggles that you see working in a startup, especially when you're an early employee, and, kind of learn everything trial by fire. So learned a lot in a good way from that experience. But then when I moved on from there into a company that was a little bit more established, and, I was kind of lost in the weeds of the department I was in, and I was doing pretty menial work in comparison to my experience level. Just kind of had that moment of reckoning where like, what am I doing? Like, this is going nowhere fast. There's no room for movement here. I know I've got a skill set that I can build upon if I just, put my feet in the water and do it. And I think a lot of the fear was imposter syndrome. We talked about earlier, like, just being willing to take that risk and jump out there and see if it's validated by the market or not. I had a hunch, but there was a lot of fear there too. So.
Totally. Yeah. Well, a couple of things I hear in that is, one, it sounds like being really clear on what is the growth trajectory that I'd like to be on, and does my current set of circumstances actually line up with that?
Right.
And if not, what do I need to do in order to shift that, change that, and get myself back on track there? You also mentioned trusting in your skill set. So important. And, I think it's so easy to forget the skills that we have developed and to more so focus on, well, here's what's not working, or here are my gaps, or, here are the things that I don't know how to do well. Yep. And then the last piece that you shared was, I think, is really important too. This whole piece around overcoming fear, being clear that that you were the thing in the way, in a sense, of moving forward.
Absolutely.
With this imposter syndrome, like, who am I to do this thing? Or, who am I to start this business? And being willing to take courageous action, in service of your vision and in service of creating something that's really unique to you.
Absolutely. And it's just the realization that there will be struggles early when you do that. it's going to suck the first few months. Like, it's going to be rough. And I was lucky to have a spouse that was really supportive and kind of helped me, move slowly into that world and not have revenue coming in for a couple months, while I was creating content and establishing my presence, and clients came, and they do when you do that and you do it the right way. But it's not going to be all sunshine and daffodils right out of the gate. This whole notion of instant 5-figure months.
That doesn't happen.
Whichever gurus out there are telling you that, it's not reality. So
yeah, 100%. Well, a big piece of this show, and a big piece of what I think is really important in the world, is helping people understand where they're getting caught in the script, where they're getting caught in the story of, this is how things are supposed to be going. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is how my life is supposed to look. And so, would be curious with you, as you've gone through these iterations and gone about building your business, like, where have you struggled with getting caught in that script? Yeah,
that's interesting. I think it's hesitating to kind of unleash certain things that I know have a potential and a chance of success based on the community I've developed, but having fear to take that next step. My clients are what they are. It's very established. It's guaranteed income. There's some other things that I've, kind of been iterating in the background, but like, finger hovering over the button, not ready to push send, because, there's going to be, in one of these, I'm actually firing off tomorrow morning. There's going to be, that moment, like rubber hits the road, right? And how do people actually see the value enough to for it to do what I think it can or not? And just kind of the fear and uncertainty behind that is enough to make you hesitate a lot of times. But it's ripping the Band-Aid off, right? Like, you just have to do it. Doing it slowly is not going to make it any better than just diving all the way in.
Totally. Yeah. And what would you say? I hear the hesitancy, and I know that I've definitely struggled with this, and I think a lot of other people struggle with this really consistently. This thing around, I know that what I'm creating is valuable, and I know that there's potential, or I really feel like there's potential, but there's this hesitancy in actually releasing it. So for you, what is the hesitancy about, and how have you worked to overcome that?
Yeah, I think it just really has to do with uncertainty of response. I have people on a wait list for a seminar that I'll talk a little bit about later. It's the first time I'm doing it, and they don't know cost yet, and I'm going to reveal that tomorrow. And that's the moment, is just the being curious if I built the value in or not, and not being sure. And that comes from imposter syndrome, right? I think I have, or they wouldn't have signed up for the wait list to begin with, but I'm not going to know until tomorrow morning or during the day tomorrow, So I think it's just that line where you're right up against the wall and you're just that close. The fear is almost greater at that point than it is anywhere else, or the hesitancy is greater than it is anywhere else along the path. Like right before you put something new into the world, because, we all want validation, right? We want to be validated that, that what we're doing is worthwhile, and that it has real, tangible monetary value attached to it, because otherwise, why are we doing it?
Totally. Yeah. And I know that can be a really scary thing for so many people, especially if it's something that you have put a lot of time and energy into. It feels like it's something that's really authentic to who you are, and that you care a lot about it.
Yep.
It can be really difficult and scary to put it out there and receive feedback on it. And I know for a lot of people, that's where they end up stopping. And so I just love, based on what you shared earlier too, it's that whole idea around overcoming that fear, like not letting that fear be the thing that stops you, but instead choosing to say, hey, I trust that this is going to be valuable. And even if people didn't think it was, it's still a great learning experience. Yeah. I'm going to learn so much from this experience and this opportunity, and be able to make it that much better next time.
Yeah, I think you get something out of it no matter what. I'll get instant feedback in terms of the price point, in terms of the, the content, whether it fits or not, we'll know. I'll know soon. So.
Totally.
And that's good. I mean, sometimes that kind of, mini failure is just as valuable. I launched a membership community, toward the end of last year, coming into this, it fell on its face and just didn't work. And I learned a lot from that and how I would approach it differently in the future. So sometimes those experiments pay off when they don't work.
Totally. Yeah. Well, in that piece too, to what you just shared, I think the cool thing about creating for yourself and creating your own business is you have total control and agency over how you want to configure it and what you want it to look like. And sometimes we can get caught in this idea of like, oh, there's a way that it's supposed to look, or like, this is how I'm supposed to be approaching it. And so I'd be curious for you, have you run into that before where you've said, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, and then you realize afterwards, like, oh, this actually wasn't the thing for me?
Yeah. I mean, when you lock into that corporate mindset and you've worked in that world for long enough, like under the structures and the rigidity that it requires, I think it's a natural habit, and something I'm telling myself to be very careful about is to not recreate what I left in terms of work patterns, in terms of like the stress I put on myself, in terms of always cranking out 8 or 9 hour days, not getting enough sleep, things that come along with that world a lot of times if you're ambitious and you're pressing and you're working hard. So I think there's a lot of intentionality that's tied to it. Like if I'm going to build this as a solopreneur, I'm building it because I want to begin with, I wanted more control over the structure. And we mentioned lifestyle design earlier. I think that's a big part of it. So I'm very intentional now about the decisions I'm making going forward and what I'm going to experiment with and try from here on. How does that fit into the bigger picture of my life and what I want from it? Because I don't want to be sitting here 10 hours a day. And I've teetered on it a little, like scaring myself that I'm recreating what I left. And so it's like the thought of like, how do I be careful here and make sure that doesn't happen?
It's a really cool awareness. I've definitely struggled with that myself. I think same deal. I used to work in corporate. I worked in corporate technology sales for a couple of years. And it's so funny. It literally is not until this moment where I'm like, oh, that's probably where I picked it up is, in leaving and not taking care of myself effectively. Like actually looking at, hey, what are the patterns that I picked up in this previous experience? What are these scripts that I learned in these previous experiences and when I was younger? And how is that now getting in the way of what I want to create in the experience that I want to have? And so if there were folks listening right now who maybe have just left corporate or who are in corporate and are considering leaving and starting a business, I guess what advice would you have for them around being responsible for those things and not having it go that same way?
Yeah, I think slow steps. There's 2 ways to approach this. You either dive all the way in, you push the corporate world aside, you have the money to live on for a while. I encourage people to take the full dive if they can and just do it and make it work, because you're going to feel better about it at the end of the day. The fear of like having the concern about having a plan B while you're still in the corporate world and you're like starting a side hustle is you only have one foot out the door. So you haven't made yourself uncomfortable enough to really fully commit to what you want to do and break away. So if people have the ability, I always encourage them to just do it. Like to stop, quit, go, like really commit to it. If it doesn't work, you can always go back. I mean, the corporate world's not going anywhere. It'll always be there. But as you do it, and as you're building those first few products or the services, think about time versus money. I think it's very important to figure out like what your hourly rate is and like what you need to survive based on that hour, and protect that and be very careful about like what that means every day. Like if you're spending so much time on administrative tasks and it's cutting into that time value of money, you've got to offload it, find somebody else to do it. If you're working on something that is so time consuming that it's chipping away and you're getting frustrated, you've got to dump it. I mean, and that's the freedom you have as a solopreneur. You don't have the freedom in the corporate world. Somebody's telling you you're going to do something, you're going to do it. So I think that's the big separation point, and how you can be more intentional about how you design the workload and the time that's attached to it. And that's going to help you maintain your sanity for sure and stay motivated. So
totally agreed. Yeah, I love that first point on how you end up creating that business, because what I know is people have different risk appetites. And people are comfortable with different levels of risk. Sure, I was somebody who was like, let's go, let's jump in. Like, we're going to make it happen. I'm going to figure it out. But I'm also clear that that's not for everybody. And, to your point, what you said, I think it's important, because often what can happen is we'll say, well, I'll work on this on the side, or eventually I'll start this thing, or eventually I'll do this or that, or what have you. But if you don't have that kind of discipline, if you don't have that kind of drive, and also if you don't have that kind of accountability, it's so much less likely to happen versus if you said, hey, we're going to jump in and we're going to do this right now. And on the second point you made too, that the time versus money piece, I really see it as this conversation of like impact versus busyness, because the thing that gets rewarded in a corporate structure is busyness. A lot of times it's the cult of
busyness,
Exactly. Yes. Doing a lot of things and, seeming like you're really busy and making other people happy and, what have you. And when you try and take that approach to business or that approach to results and, try and create that inside of your business, it just doesn't end up working. Because ultimately the thing that matters is, does this have legs? Will this work? Are you generating the income that you need to on a monthly basis? And so therefore it becomes more about impact. What are the activities that I'm taking on a day-to-day basis to drive my business forward instead of just being busy?
Yeah. It's very easy to get busy as a solopreneur because there's so many things that we have to touch. Your CMO, CTO, CEO, CFO, you're doing all of it yourself in the early going. And there's stuff I absolutely do not like that I'm still touching, but I'm at the point now, hopefully soon, where I have enough leverage where I can say, okay, I'm hiring somebody for that. At least, VAs or, kind of fractional people to touch some of the things where that time value money is just not there, I think. So that offloading is a big part of it. When you can get there, it takes some time, but.
Agreed. So, one of the things that we've touched on a little bit is this idea of what I would call limiting beliefs. So these stories that we have about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves that get in the way of what we want and really moving us forward, moving our businesses forward. And so, Kriss, would be curious for you in your entrepreneurial journey, like where have you struggled with those kinds of limiting beliefs?
Yeah, for context, I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. I grew up in West Texas and, in the Bible Belt. And in that world, especially in Amarillo, there's like 4 power money families. If you have the right last name, you're pretty much set up for success. So if you don't, there's kind of this ingrained imposter syndrome that's baked into you of like, okay, I'm lesser than, I'm not one of these people. So that very much has been a part of what I've had to fight over the course of my life. And so it always kind of bubbles back up. And it's just there to think through. I think the older I've gotten and the more I can recognize it, the more I can fight it off. So I think that's one. And in terms of my content creation journey and how I've built my brand, I've kind of always sat behind a keyboard. I'm a writer at heart, but I think I'm competent on video and I'm decent at it. But it took me a long time to be willing to put myself out there and put my face out there. I didn't do it for the first 4 or 5 months of content creation on LinkedIn. I was just writing. And it's kind of the point where I'm sick of myself. I don't want to see, my written posts anymore. I've got to mix it up. And the only way I got over that hump was to go through a video intensive with some guys here in Austin who do just that. They pretty much help you get over the fear and walk you through the process of doing it. And they really helped me get that opportunity and take the lead. So.
Nice. And what do you think was the, the underlying belief or the fear that was keeping you from getting on video?
Just concern of how it would come across, how it would sound, how it would look, if I was going to be competent enough to recreate the cadence and the way that I structure content written wise, if that was going to flow through well on video. And it has in time. It took a ton of practice. The first few were terrible. But that's part of what you can expect when you try something new, is it's going to be bad for a while. But if you're willing to fight through that and sit in it a little bit, it improves.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, what I hear in your speaking, what I heard in your shares were, the first most important piece, and I think there's always is the first step to behavioral change and really creating the life that you want, is becoming aware of how am I getting in my own way?
Yeah.
What are the stories that I'm telling myself? Because until you're aware of it, you can't do anything about it. And, the second piece that you mentioned, which I really loved, was you also, you looked for and sought out support. Yep. So it wasn't just hey, I'm going to continue to struggle with this by myself. I'm actually going to put myself into an environment and a structure that's going to help me work through this limiting belief or this story that I have about myself. And, was just curious, is there anything else that you practice as far as actions or habits that help you to continue to break those stories up?
Yeah, I meditate. I think that's big for me is I meditate as often as I can. I don't stick with it as consistently as I would like to as a practice, but it's at least 3 to 4 days a week. And sitting in that and just having quiet time and having a morning ritual, I think to some extent that has nothing to do with this world, that we all exist in, of social media and content creation and meetings and Zoom calls. I like to spend an hour every morning of not touching anything. I'll sit there with my dogs, or sit on the patio with a cup of coffee, or watch the birds, whatever, just do anything, but immediately look at the phone. And it's a hard habit to break, but I've felt kind of more centered and like just more energetic to kick off the day when I've been intentional about it. So that's a big one for me.
Makes total sense. What I really hear in that is space and presence.
Yeah.
Like you're creating space for yourself and the ability to be present to, how am I feeling right now? What mode am I operating inside of? Because, I know when things get crazy or overwhelming or what have you, we tend to drop down to the lowest energy state, or like our go-to stories. And a lot of times our go-to stories are, like you mentioned, I'm an imposter, I'm not good enough at this, or I don't deserve this, or, this isn't going to come across well, or what have you.
Right.
And so I love that, like creating that space and presence, I think is so important for being able to elevate outside of those stories, those scripts, so that you can actually, really consciously and with agency decide how you want your day and how you want your life to go.
Right. And then it compounds. I think if you're consistent, I talk about compounding returns all the time. It's a lot of what happens with content is you have that consistency creates compounding returns, and it just builds and builds and builds. But if you don't have that, in your life and how you build, you're going to hit a frustration point where you're just going to throw in the towel. Burnout will peek its head around the corner. So.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Well, Kriss, the question that I love to ask people as a kind of a wrap-up question is, what does living unscripted mean to you?
I think just having the freedom to make daily decisions is the big one for me. I feel like I set, in, like I said before when we were talking, open office spaces under fluorescent lights for long enough. I did that for a long time, and the ability to make decisions when life happens was not easy because they were under somebody else's control. And I think what I like most about being a solopreneur is just the little things, being able to go to a brewery on the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday afternoon if I feel like it, and have a beer while I'm working. I couldn't do that in the corporate world. Take a long walk with the dogs if I feel like it, in the middle of the day, like go somewhere with my wife, like run errands, and have them not all build up on Saturday or Sunday. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's the little things like that make life much more comfortable when you're not, when you're controlling it and you're like intentionally planning that, and you can, because you don't have anybody to answer to in that respect.
Makes total sense. Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things to talk with people around is, and we've mentioned it a couple times, but this idea of lifestyle design. And, that also, that's not just, how many clients am I going to have, or what days am I going to work? Like that goes for everything. To your point, like, hey, I want to go on Tuesday, I want to go to a brewery and I want to get a beer. That's awesome. Where do I want to sit in my house? What kind of desk do I want to have? When do I want to wake up? It's like all of those tiny pieces that are a reflection of you and how you work best and how you optimize your energy. And when you put them all together, you end up creating, in my experience, a life that feels a lot more true and authentic to you versus feeling like you're trying to fit into somebody else's story.
Yes, that's the big difference for sure. And it's just more fulfilling generally when you can do that. It's not without struggle, but it's the struggle. The struggles are much more worth it. I think it's what it comes down to. So
totally, I was like, it's hard work, and so is corporate. So it's not,
choose your hard, right? You hear that all the time, like choose your hard, and I think that this is a great example of that.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kriss, it has been such a pleasure, man. So good to connect with you and hear more about your story. And, thank you so much for sharing. And for the folks who are interested in, learning more about you and connecting with you, where can they find you? And, is there anything that you have coming up that you'd like to let people know about?
Yeah, a great place to find me is on LinkedIn. I pretty much live there. I'm on there, however many 5 hours a day, probably doing my own work and client work. So yeah, just follow me there. Send me a DM anytime, open book. I always like to have those conversations. Yeah, my website is zanateventures.com. So ZANATE ventures.com. And that outlines my service offerings for ghostwriting, for social media ghostwriting and blogging ghostwriting clients. And I'm kicking off my first LinkedIn and content strategy workshop intensive. It's 2 nights in September. It's September 8th and 9th for 2 evenings. I'm taking a total of 10 people, going to split them into 2 cohorts of 5. And we're going to dive in to what it takes to establish a brand on LinkedIn and have a content strategy that helps you build awareness, whether you're a job seeker or you're wanting to move careers or change careers, or you want to become part of the creator economy. It's going to be about that stuff. And I think I'm really looking forward to that and excited about it. And you can get on the wait list for that at go.zanateventures.com/workshop. So that's the big thing I have coming up.
Nice. Awesome. Well, for those of you who listening who connected with Kriss, would highly suggest you reach out and connect with him virtually, in person, what have you. Great guy to know and really great content. So definitely make sure that you go out and check out his profile. If you're watching this as a replay, would still love to hear from you. What resonated with you? What questions you have? Make sure to do #replay when you post that comment. And that is all for us today. So I will see you next Wednesday. Kriss, hope you have a great rest of your week, man. And we'll talk super soon.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.